Ah yes, 1884. I remember it like it was yesterday. We didn't have automobiles, or in-home electricity, or the state of Arizona, but we did have baseball. My last two videos each focused pretty heavily on the 1884 baseball season. In this video, I talked about how Fred Dunlap had the fourth highest single-season OPS plus ever in 1884, but I argued that it shouldn't count, as the league he played in was nowhere near the talent level of the other major leagues. He played in the Union Association, a league that was created by a rich guy just because he felt like it, only existed in 1884, had no competitive balance, and only barely made it through the season. In this video, I talked about Fleet and Weldy Walker, the first two openly black men to play Major League Baseball. They played for the Toledo Blue Stockings of the American Association in, you guessed it, 1884. 1884 was the only season that they played in the major leagues, and it would be the last season that a black player would play in an integrated major league until Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in 1947. There's a lot more to those stories though, and I highly recommend you watch those two videos first if you haven't already, before proceeding with this one. Consider this part 3 in what I just now decided is a trilogy. The rise and fall of the Union Association and the presence of black players in the majors already made the 1884 season stand out, but my friends, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The National League consisted of 8 teams in its inaugural 1876 season. That number decreased to 6 in 1877 and 1878, then went back up to 8 in 1879. There were 8 teams again in 1880 and 1881, and then the American Association came along in 1882. A second major league meant more teams. The American Association had 6 teams to go along with the National League's 8 teams, for a total of 14 major league teams in 1882. The American Association added 2 teams in 1883, bringing the total number of major league teams to 16. In 1884, there were 33 Major League Baseball teams, more than double the previous season. The newly formed Union Association had 8 teams, bringing the total up to 24, but where did the remaining 9 teams come from? If you've seen the Fred Dunlap Union Association video, then you already know the answer, but for those that didn't take my advice to watch that video first, I'll give you a quick rundown. The Union Association never had more than 8 teams in it at a time, but it had to frequently replace bankrupt teams with teams from minor leagues throughout the season. 3 of the original 8 teams were replaced during the season, with one of the replacement teams also needing to be replaced by another replacement team. That brings the total up to 28. The remaining 5 teams were not Union Association teams, but they were a result of the Union Association's establishment. The UA was essentially at war with the NL and the AA in 1884, and part of the AA's war tactics was to try to block the UA out of key cities. For this reason, the AA added teams in Indianapolis, Toledo, Brooklyn, and Washington, D.C. for the 1884 season. And a quick side note while we're on the topic, it was this act of war with the Union Association that made Fleet Walker the first openly black major league player. Walker signed with Toledo when they were a minor league team in 1883, and stayed with the team when they joined the American Association in 1884. The American Association expansion brought the total number of teams to 32. The American Association's Washington, D.C. team was replaced by the Richmond Virginians during the 1884 season, bringing the total to 33 teams. For 136 years, 33 was the highest number of Major League Baseball teams that had existed in a single season. The decision in 2020 to retroactively classify 7 Negro leagues as major leagues has resulted in exactly 1 season with more major league teams. In 1932, there were 35 major league teams, but those teams were spread out among 4 leagues, not 3. The American League, the National League, the East-West League, and the Negro Southern League. 1924 also tied 1884 with 33 teams, but again, it took 4 major leagues to do it, as opposed to the 3 leagues in 1884. There were 18 other seasons that also had 4 major leagues, but in those 18 seasons, the number of major league teams was less than the 33 teams that the 3 major leagues had in 1884. In 2024, we have 30 teams in what is effectively and legally only 1 league though, so what's the big deal? That may be true, but we also have more than 5 times as many people, the ability to travel by airplane instead of 20-mile-per-hour train, 12 additional states, and Canada. We have teams in California, Arizona, Washington State, Texas, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Ontario, etc. In 1884, the National League, American Association, and Union Association crammed 33 teams into 15 states in the Northeast and Midwest. There wasn't a single team south of Richmond, nor a single team west of Kansas City. There were 2 teams in Baltimore, 2 teams in Boston, 2 teams in Chicago, 2 teams in Cincinnati, 2 teams in St. Louis, 2 teams in Washington, D.C., 2 teams in Pittsburgh, 3 teams in Philadelphia, and 3 teams in New York City, if you consider Brooklyn to be part of New York City. To say that the market was oversaturated is an understatement. It proved to not be sustainable, and the number of Major League teams returned to 16 in 1885. Let's talk about home runs. Huge part of the game today. Not a huge part of the game in the 1800s. In 1882, a total of 178 home runs were hit in the National League and American Association in 571 games. In 1883, a total of 238 home runs were hit in 785 games. In 1884, a total of 689 home runs were hit in 1,537 games. So that's 0.31 home runs per game in 1882, 0.30 home runs per game in 1883, and 0.49 home runs per game in 1884. Then, in 1885, teams hit 323 home runs in 890 games, or 0.36 home runs per game. Okay, 1884 was a bit of an outlier, sure, but not a huge jump, probably just coincidental. Let's remove the American Association and the Union Association from the equation. In 1882, 126 home runs were hit in 338 National League games. In 1883, 124 home runs were hit in 395 games. In 1884, 321 home runs were hit in 456 games. Then, in 1885, the number of home runs went back down to 174 in 445 games. Definitely not coincidental. I wonder what happened that caused this increase in the NL. If only there was some sort of hint or trend or something that might help me figure out exactly where all these extra home runs came from. Oh. Looks like they were eating a healthy, balanced breakfast in Chicago. 142 home runs. The Chicago White Stockings hit 142 home runs in 1884. That's more than the entire National League had ever hit in a season. That's over 100 more home runs than the Buffalo Bisons, who hit 39 home runs, the National League's second most that season. That's nearly 11 times as many home runs as the White Stockings hit the previous season, with essentially the same lineup. What happened? Let's take a trip to Chicago. In 1884, the White Stockings played at Lakefront Park 2, Electric Boogaloo. As you step into the batter's box, you look out to right field, and you see the right field foul pole 196 feet from you. You shift your gaze to left field, and you see the left field foul pole 180 feet from you. The deepest part of the park is center field at a whopping 300 feet. Okay, I think I get it now. Just in case you're having trouble visualizing it though, here's Yankee Stadium, which some people erroneously refer to as a Little League park, even though its total foul territory area is average compared to other current MLB fields, and it's not actually a hitter-friendly ballpark at all, as its StatCast park factor is exactly 100, which means it's neutral for hitters and pitchers, but that's a topic for another video. Anyway, Yankee Stadium does famously have a short porch in right field, which I thought would make for a good comparison to Lakefront Park's short porch. So this is Yankee Stadium, and this is roughly how Lakefront Park compares. Speaking of Little League parks, Howard J. Lamedy Stadium, where the Little League World Series is played, is 225 feet down the line on either side. 10-year-olds have to hit the ball farther for a home run than the White Stockings had to in 1884. 1884 wasn't the White Stockings' first season at Lakefront Park, but in previous seasons, balls hit over the short left field fence were doubles, not home runs. There are conflicting reports about the exact dimensions of the ballpark and about which fence was the short one, left field or right field, but whichever one it was, balls hit over it counted as doubles. Until 1884, when the White Stockings decided that all balls hit over the fence at their home park would count as home runs. And yes, the White Stockings were the ones who had the power to make that decision. As the short fences were a quirk of their grounds, they had the ability to make ground rules about how to deal with them. That may seem crazy, but this system is still largely in place. Fenway Park has a ladder on the Green Monster, something that no other ballpark has, so the Red Sox are entitled to make rules about how to deal with balls that strike the ladder. The current ground rule at Fenway is that if a batted ball hits the top of the ladder and then goes over the fence, the batter is awarded 2 bases, not 4. Tropicana Field has catwalks up by the ceiling. Or it did, at least. The Rays are permitted to make ground rules about how to deal with a batted ball that hits the catwalks. Currently, the rule is that hitting certain catwalks over the stands results in a home run, while hitting others over the field in play results in a ball in play, which can become a hit if it drops or an out if it's caught. Wrigley Field has ivy on its outfield walls, and the Cubs therefore needed to create a ground rule for the possibility of a batted ball getting stuck in that ivy. The current rule is that a player is awarded 2 bases. This, along with the Fenway Park ladder rule, would result in a true ground rule double. A batted ball hitting the ground and then bouncing over the fence is commonly referred to as a ground rule double, but it's not the result of a ground rule, and is therefore not actually a ground rule double at all. In 1883, Lakefront Park had a ground rule double, but in 1884, Lakefront Park had a ground rule home run. Or I guess it would just be a regular home run, since they removed the ground rule that originally made a ball over the fence not a home run. Either way, the result was a massive spike in home run totals. In 1883, the White Sox hit 13 home runs as a team, which was below the National League average, but they led the National League in doubles by a wide margin, with 277. In 1884, they hit 115 fewer doubles and 129 more home runs. Visiting teams were able to take advantage of the rule change as well, of course. The 7 other National League teams hit 179 home runs in 1884, a substantial increase from the 111 home runs they hit in 1883, and also substantially higher than the 120 home runs they would hit in 1885. But because Chicago had more experience playing and practicing in Lakefront Park, they better understood how to take advantage of their short fences, and were able to develop a strategy that centered around them. Accordingly, the 1884 White Stockings had a 39-17 record at home, and a 23-33 record on the road. Prior to 1884, the most home runs ever hit in a single season was 14, a record set by Harry Stovey in 1883. Buck Ewing and Charlie Jones were the only other players to have hit double-digit home runs in a season, as they both hit 10, also in 1883. In 1884, 10 players hit double-digit home runs. 5 of them played for the White Stockings. 4 players hit more than 20 home runs in 1884. All 4 of them played for the White Stockings. Let's take a look at these 10 players that hit 10 or more home runs, and let's actually start with honorable mention Silver Flint, who hit 9 home runs in 73 games. Flint's career began in 1875, and from 1875 through 1883, he had played 479 Major League Baseball games, mostly for Chicago. In those 479 games, he hit 6 home runs. In 1883 specifically, he hit 0 in 85 games. Then he hit 9 home runs in 1884. Harry Stovey hit 10 home runs in 1884, and unlike Flint, this makes sense. Stovey was the one who set the single-season home run record the previous season, and he was arguably the best power hitter of the 1800s. He led his league in home runs 5 times during his career, and when he retired in 1893, he did so as Major League Baseball's all-time leader in career home runs. It may seem perplexing that Stovey's home run total actually decreased in 1884 compared to 1883, but Stovey played in the American Association, not the National League. He didn't get the boost because he never played a league game in Lakefront Park. John Riley hit 11 home runs in 1884. He hit 9 dingers in 1883 and would have 10 and 13 home run seasons later in his career. Riley also played in the American Association. Ed Crane hit 12 home runs in 1884 as a rookie. Crane played in the Union Association, though. He only played 14 games the following season, then played 80 games for the National League's Washington Nationals in 1886. He hit 0 home runs in those 80 games. He also had a 37 OPS plus and was worth negative 1.5 WAR. He didn't play in the majors in 1887, and when he returned in 1888, he did so as a pitcher. He finished his career with a total of 18 home runs. Despite playing for 8 years, he hit 67% of his career home runs in his rookie season. Even more evidence showing that the Union Association was a complete joke of a league. Fred Dunlap hit 13 home runs in 1884, but we already know all about that. King Kelly, who played for the White Stockings, hit 13 home runs in 1884. His previous career high for home runs was 3. Kelly was a great player, and his career would eventually end with a plaque in Cooperstown, but he never hit double-digit home runs in a season again after 1884. Dan Bruthers hit 14 home runs in 1884. Bruthers was an awesome hitter. He led the league in OPS 8 times during his career. In 1884, he played for the Buffalo Bisons of the National League, and while there unfortunately doesn't seem to be any stats available regarding how many of his home runs came in each ballpark, I have to imagine that quite a few of his 14 came while playing against the White Stockings in Chicago. He did hit 11 home runs in 1886 and 12 home runs in 1887, but his career high is the 14 that he hit in 1884. Cap Anson, player-manager of the Chicago White Stockings, hit 21 home runs in 1884. Prior to 1884, the most home runs he had ever hit in a season was 2. Starting with his first season in 1871, his yearly home run totals were 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 2, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 21. That's 5 home runs in his first 13 seasons. 5 home runs in his first 833 games played. Then 21 home runs in 112 games in year 14. White Stockings outfielder Abner Dalrymple hit 22 home runs in 1884. His track record is similar to Anson's. 0 home runs in 1878, 0 home runs in 1879, 0 home runs in 1880, 1 home run in 1881, 1 home run in 1882, 2 home runs in 1883, 22 home runs in 1884. He would finish his career with 43 home runs, meaning that he hit more than half of his career home runs in 1884. White Stockings second baseman Fred Pfeffer hit 25 home runs in 1884. 1884 was his 3rd season in the National League. He hit 1 home run in each of his previous 2 seasons. Pfeffer would have one other big power season in 1887 when he hit 16 home runs while still playing for Chicago. After those 2 seasons, though, his next highest single-season home run total was 8. And finally, White Stockings third baseman Ed Williamson shattered the previous single-season record of 14 by hitting 27 home runs in 1884. Williamson had 8 total home runs in his first 6 seasons, with the highest single-season mark being 3 in 1882. I think Williamson is the best representation of exactly how the White Stockings were able to use their home field to their advantage. Williamson was already adept at hitting the ball over Lakefront Park's short porch. In 1883, he led the National League with 49 doubles, a good number of them undoubtedly being ground rule doubles that went over the fence. Williamson was essentially the same hitter in 1884 as he was in 1883. Most of his stats are remarkably similar. 111 hits in 1883 versus 116 hits in 1884. 276 batting average in 1883 versus 278 batting average in 1884. 56 extra base hits in 1883 versus 53 extra base hits in 1884. The only difference is what kind of extra base hits. In 1883, Williamson hit 49 doubles, 5 triples, and 2 home runs. In 1884, he hit only 18 doubles, but 8 triples and 27 home runs. He was the same hitter, he was just awarded 2 additional bases on some of his hits in 1884. Williamson's 27 home runs in 1884 would stand as the single-season record for 35 years until Babe Ruth hit 29 in 1919. In those 35 years, only 4 other players would join the 20 home run club. Sam Thompson hit 20 in 1889, Buck Freeman hit 25 in 1899, Frank Schulte hit 21 in 1911, and Gabby Cravath hit 24 in 1915. Babe Ruth obviously joined the club with his 29 home runs in 1919, and then rendered the club obsolete with his 54 home runs in 1920. What's kind of crazy, though, is that when Babe Ruth hit 54 home runs in 1920, Ed Williamson still had the most home runs in a season by a guy not named Babe Ruth. In fact, no one else joined the 20 home run club in 1920. After Ruth's 54, the next most home runs hit by a player in 1920 was George Sisler's 19. Then Ruth hit 59 in 1921, and the rest of the competition still lagged behind. It wouldn't be until 1922 that the rest of Major League Baseball caught on to this whole home run thing that Ruth was doing, and a few players other than Ruth surpassed Williamson. The White Stockings moved to a different ballpark in 1885, and just like that, home run numbers returned to normal. So the number of teams spiked in 1884, the number of home runs spiked in 1884, the number of black players spiked from 0 to 2 in 1884. You know what else spiked? Volleyball players, probably. Just kidding. In 1884, volleyball was hanging out with automobiles in 12 of the 50 states in does-not-yet-exist land. Strikeouts also spiked in 1884. And the reason for this was also largely due to a rule change. Not a ground rule this time, but a universal rule. Let's rewind to 1876 for a second. It's the first year of the National League, and, surprise, you're up to bat. The pitcher delivers the ball to you. Underhand. You're caught off guard by his underhand delivery and do not swing as a result. The umpire says nothing. Was that a ball or a strike, you ask the umpire? Neither, he responds. Confused, you wait for the next pitch, but it appears that the pitcher is waiting for you. Call your pitch, the umpire says. Fastball? The location, not the speed. Oh, high? The pitcher complies and pitches the ball high. You again choose not to swing, as you have absolutely no idea what's going on. If you don't swing at the next one, it's going to be a strike, the umpire says to you. The at-bat continues in this manner, with you telling the pitcher whether you want the ball low or high, and the umpire deciding if he feels like calling a strike, a ball, or nothing at all. The pitcher apparently loses his command, as you manage to work the count to 8-2. You're confused about how you have 8 balls without walking 2 times over, but you've learned not to question it. Finally, on the 9th called ball, you are free to walk down to first base. So to recap that experience, in 1876, it was illegal for pitchers to throw the ball. They had to pitch it underhand. A swing and a miss was always a strike, but a pitch that was not swung at was totally up to the umpire's discretion, and the umpire usually only called strikes if he felt that the batter was intentionally wasting time by not swinging, and only called balls if he felt that the pitcher was kind of doing the same thing, intentionally wasting time by not throwing good pitches. The umpire always gave a warning before the first called strike. Batters were allowed to call for either a low pitch or a high pitch, and if the pitcher missed the called zone, they were given a ball. If the umpire felt like calling it, of course. It took 9 balls in a plate appearance for a batter to be awarded a base on balls. Under these rules, pitchers averaged 1.1 strikeouts per 9 innings in 1876. The rules changed gradually over the next decade. In 1878, all pitched balls resulted in either a ball or a strike. Pitchers averaged 2.9 strikeouts per 9 innings that season. In 1880, the number of called balls for a walk was reduced from 9 to 7, and the warning before the first called strike was removed. Pitchers averaged 3.0 strikeouts per 9. In 1882, pitchers were allowed to throw sidearm. They averaged 3.0 strikeouts per 9 again in 1882. In 1883, only 6 balls were required for a walk instead of 7. Pitchers averaged 3.4 strikeouts per 9. Then, in 1884, pitchers were finally permitted to throw overhand, as all restrictions on their delivery were eliminated. The 3.4 strikeouts per 9 from the previous season jumped up to 5 strikeouts per 9. Prior to 1884, only 3 pitchers had ever struck out 300 or more batters in a season. In 1884, 15 pitchers did it. Prior to 1884, the most strikeouts a pitcher had accumulated in a single season was 359, a record set by Tim Keefe in 1883. In 1884, 7 different pitchers broke that record. Future Hall of Famer Pud Galvin struck out 369 batters in 1884. He struck out 90 more batters than he did the previous season, despite pitching 20 fewer innings. His 369 strikeouts in 1884 is his career high. Bill Sweeney struck out 374 batters in 1884. It was the only full season of his career. He had pitched 20 games previously, in 1882, and he struck out only 48 batters. He never pitched again after 1884. Yet another player that played well in the Union Association, but did absolutely nothing in a real major league either before or after. Guy Hecker struck out 385 batters in 1884. He struck out over 200 more batters in 1884 than he did in 1883. His next highest strikeout season was 1885, when he struck out 209 batters, 165 fewer than he struck out in 1884. Charlie Buffington struck out 417 batters in 1884. Like Hecker, his 1884 strikeout total was also over 200 higher than his total from the previous season. 1884 was his career high by a margin of 175 strikeouts. Old Hoss Radbourn struck out 441 batters in 1884. Radbourn was one of the 3 pitchers that had struck out over 300 batters in a season previously, but his 441 Ks in 1884 was still an increase of 126 compared to his previous best. Doopy Shaw struck out 451 batters in 1884. He struck out 142 batters in 227 2/3 innings pitched in the National League, and 309 batters in 315 2/3 innings pitched in the Union Association. 451 is more than double his next best season, and more than 6 times his 1883 total. And the pitcher with the most strikeouts in 1884 was Hugh Daly, who struck out 483 batters. He did play the entire season in the Union Association, so make of that what you will. His previous best was 171 strikeouts in 1883. After 1884, he never struck out more than 31 batters in a season. At the end of the 1884 season, 24 of the top 30 spots on the single-season strikeout leaderboard were from 1884. Matt Kilroy did take the top spot in 1886 when he struck out 513 batters in 583 innings pitched, and Toad Ramsey took the number 2 spot that same season when he struck out 499 batters, but to this day, Daly, Shaw, Radbourne, Buffington, and Hecker still sit 3rd through 7th respectively. The current leaderboard for most strikeouts in a single season features 6 1884 seasons in the top 10 and 11 1884 seasons in the top 30. None of those 11 pitchers reached 2,000 strikeouts for their career, despite some of them being over a fifth of the way there in just one season. Interestingly, the strikeout rate decreased to 3.8 per 9 innings in 1885. That's still a higher rate than any pre-1884 season, but it is a significant drop-off from the 5 strikeouts per 9 in 1884. My best guess as to why is the novelty factor of overhand pitching. In addition to allowing pitchers more velocity, it was also something that hitters had not had to deal with before, and were not accustomed to. Presumably, as batters got more exposure to overhand pitching, they got better at hitting it, and therefore struck out less. The 5 strikeouts per 9 innings that pitchers averaged in 1884 would stand as the highest strikeout rate in a season until 1959. Everything was higher in 1884, including WAR. That may seem odd considering that WAR is relative to the rest of the league. There's a set amount of WAR distributed each season based on the number of games played. It's impossible for the total WAR to go up or down from season to season unless the number of games that each team played goes up or down. Or the number of teams goes up or down. More teams means more total games, even if each team is playing the same number of games. More total games means more wins, and more wins means more WAR. And we've already established that 1884 definitely had more teams. 1884 was pretty much the perfect storm for ridiculous WAR totals. In addition to the extra total WAR available, it was also standard for pitchers to pitch 400, 500, or, in Old Hoss Radbourne's case, 678 innings in a season. More innings pitched means more WAR. In the 1870s and 1880s, most teams had one primary pitcher and one backup pitcher. The additional teams in 1884 meant more primary pitchers throwing a ridiculous amount of innings, and therefore more opportunities for players to rack up WAR. Surely the sharp increase in strikeouts led to pitchers having higher WAR as well, right? Yes, but probably not in the way that you might be thinking. Fangraphs WAR directly factors in strikeouts since it's based on FIP, fielding independent pitching. FIP is a measure of a pitcher's performance that only takes into account home runs, walks, hit batsmen, and strikeouts. I think FIP is an interesting stat with some applications, specifically when compared to ERA, but I don't like using Fangraphs WAR for pitchers for this reason. Personally, I think run prevention is a better measure of pitcher value, and that's why we're talking about Baseball Reference WAR, not Fangraphs WAR. Baseball Reference's pitcher WAR is centered around runs allowed per 9 innings pitched. And notice that I said runs allowed, not earned runs allowed. That's the key here. Fielding was hard in the 1880s. Gloves were extremely primitive, and only some players wore them at all. As a result, lots of errors were committed. In 1884, an average of 4.73 errors per team per game were made. The average fielding percentage across all positions was .891. By comparison, there were 0.53 errors per team per game in 2024, and average fielding percentage was .985. With the exception of a dropped third strike, a strikeout is an out every time, without the need for other players to field, throw, or catch the ball. Strikeouts prevent errors. This is still a benefit of the strikeout now, but it was a much bigger benefit in the 1880s, when errors were made on over 10% of fielded balls. Since Baseball Reference WAR uses runs allowed instead of earned runs allowed, pitchers are hurt by the mistakes that their fielders make. The increase in strikeouts among the top pitchers in 1884 allowed them to decrease the detrimental effect of errors, and stand out more from their contemporaries who weren't able to strike out batters as effectively. And of course, there's the Union Association. Any major league caliber pitchers that made the jump to the UA were able to dominate the much weaker competition, and because they were so much better than the rest of the league, they were worth quite a bit of WAR. The aftermath of this perfect storm was 9 players with a Baseball Reference WAR over 11. Radbourn, Galvin, Buffington, and Welch played in the National League, Hecker and Mullane played in the American Association, and McCormick, Taylor, and Sweeney split time between two leagues, but each of them spent more than 50% of the season in the Union Association. And of course, all 9 of these players were pitchers. It's quiz time! Which of these 3 players had a WAR above 11 in 2024? Time's up! The answer is none of them. No players had a WAR above 11 in 2024, or 2023, or 2022, or 2021. The last player to have a WAR above 11 was Barry Bonds in 2002. Only 18 players have had an 11 WAR season in the past 100 years. 9 players did it in 1 year in 1884. Needless to say, that is by far the highest number of players to have 11 or more WAR in a single season. The next closest year was 1886, when 4 players did it. And it's not like these 9 players just barely broke 11 WAR. There were 4 players over 16 WAR. 4 of the top 7 and 5 of the top 12 WAR seasons of all time happened in 1884. And that's total WAR, by the way, which includes hitting performance for pitchers. This can benefit good hitting pitchers, but hurt poor hitting pitchers. If we just look at pitching WAR, Pud Galvin's 1884 season is number 1, with 20.5 pitching WAR. It is the only 20-plus pitching WAR season in MLB history. At the top of the ridiculous 1884 WAR list is Old Hoss Radbourn. His 19.4 WAR is the second highest single-season WAR of all time, just behind Tim Keefe's 1883 season when he was worth 20.2 WAR. We've already talked about Radbourn a bit. I mentioned earlier that his 441 strikeouts in 1884 are the 5th most ever in a single season, but his 1884 season was fascinating for many other reasons beyond that. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about him since there's already a great baseball bits that discusses his accomplishments, but I would be remiss to talk about the 1884 season without at least briefly discussing how it was the year that Old Hoss Radbourn likely had the greatest pitching season of all time. In addition to the 2nd most WAR and 5th most strikeouts, Radbourn also pitched the 2nd most innings in a season in 1884. His 678 2/3 innings pitched is just an inning and a third shy of Will White's record of 680 innings pitched, which he set in 1879. Radbourn pitched 73 complete games, also the 2nd most ever, also trailing only 1879 Will White. Radbourn had a 1.38 ERA and 2.05 ERA plus across those 678 2/3 innings pitched. With a minimum of 250 innings pitched, that's the 17th best ERA plus in a season. With a minimum of 300 innings pitched, it's the 9th best ERA plus in a season. And with a minimum of 400 innings pitched, it's number 1. Radbourn also set a single season record in 1884 that I can say with complete confidence will never be broken. He won either 59 or 60 games, depending on whether you use modern scoring or 1800 scoring. Either way, that's the most games any pitcher has ever won in a season, and it's the most games any pitcher will ever win in a season. Radbourn won the pitching Triple Crown in the National League in 1884, a remarkable accomplishment considering the tough competition from Galvin, Buffington, and Welch. Surprisingly, Guy Hecker won the Triple Crown in the American Association as well, making 1884 the first season with 2 Triple Crowns. Despite all that happened during the 1884 season, despite the increase in home runs due to the White Stockings abusing their field, despite the switch to overhand pitching and the spike in strikeouts, despite the Union Association and the extra teams, despite black players playing in the league for what they thought was the first time, when the season finally came to a close, the National League and American Association still weren't satisfied. They had one more trick up their sleeve to make 1884 even more special. For the first time, the champions of the National League and the champions of the American Association would play against each other in the World Series, to determine who the champion of the entire world was. The Union Association wasn't invited because it sucked. Old Hoss Radbourn's Providence Grays were the top team from the NL, and they faced off in a 3-game exhibition against the New York Metropolitans, the pennant winners in the American Association. The Grays won all 3 games. Radbourn pitched every inning of all 3 games and did not give up a single earned run in the series. Unlike everything else that made the 1884 season stand out, the World Series was not an anomaly. It would become a tradition between the 2 leagues, and the pennant winners of the National League and American Association would face off in an exhibition series of varying length every year until 1890. The American League would take part in the tradition starting in 1903, and of course, it is still played annually to this day. It looks like a lot of my viewers aren't subscribed. Remember when all the YouTubers used to do that? Whatever happened to that? It was like a COVID era thing. Anyway, subscribe, like, comment. Thanks. Bye.